There's a moment in The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe where one of the kids learns that Aslan is a lion, gets nervous, and asks if he's safe. And the answer, as Lewis writes it, is of course he isn't safe, but he's good. Most Christians can quote that line. It's one of the most famous lines in the entire series. We put it on coffee mugs, we hang it on our walls. But here's the question Lewis was actually asking. Why does the Jesus most people know look so tame, so manageable, so agreeable? The Jesus we find most often in the American church is safe. He's predictable. He votes a certain way, he blesses certain things and disapproves of others. He shows up where he's invited and doesn't surprise anyone. That's what we're diving into today on The Christian Skeptic in part 2 of our series through the Chronicles of Narnia. Let's get to it. Welcome back to The Christian Skeptic, man. Part 2 in our series about Narnia and life and skepticism and all that stuff. Last week we talked about the magician's nephew, Lewis's portrayal of creation and how evil enters the world through human foolishness, etc. And this week we're talking about The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe, which features one of its main characters, Edmund, as kind of a direct descendant of that evil that was brought into the world, and there's a cost involved this time. And Lewis talks about the deeper magic as his kind of answer to the problem of evil that he set up in The Magician's Nephew. So I imagine we're going to be talking a lot about the Atonement. That's kind of a main theme of this book. We don't have to start there, but it is one of the main themes. It's also one of the elements I think a lot of Lewis's critics tend to criticize in this series and in this book. So if you do want to start there, I have a question. I have a list of questions. The first question, which I'll ask you, and you can set up the book however you want before answering, but just diving into the Atonement a little bit. Do you think that what Lewis portrays in The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe, is he trying to make a specific argument about what the Atonement is and what it represents? Or is he just giving us a straightforward kind of retelling of the gospel, which by necessity includes the death and resurrection of Jesus Christ?
So we know that Lewis was writing this book. We actually began writing this book in 1939. Okay, so, and that's the kind of the dawn of World War II. He wrote it because, in part, well, when he was 16 years old, he had this vision of a faun, a mythical creature. If you've seen the movie or read the book, it's Mr. Tumnus, the faun, walking in a snowy embankment with an umbrella. That was it at first. And then that was before he became a Christian. That was while he was in the throes of atheism. But he had this idea pop into his head that he wanted to form a story around. And then in 1939, during World War II, in which he had fought in World War I with Tolkien. So in 1939, World War II is going on. He is delivering speeches on the BBC. I think that's in 41, 42, 43, that becomes Mere Christianity at the same time that he's writing The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe. A lot of people don't realize, because the Chronicles of Narnia were pumped out so quickly, that The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe took him a decade to write. And all the others combined took him about 5.5, 6 years.
Yeah. And
it's because he could not bring the story together until he said Aslan came bounding in. That was his phraseology. And that did not happen. The original, a lot of people don't realize this, but the original first edition, first draft, I guess you would say, of Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe was not The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe because there was no lion. Aslan was not in it. And he said it was such a mess, and Tolkien hated it so much that he almost threw it away. And he actually did throw the first, when he read it to the Inklings in 1937 or 1947, he threw the first draft away after 8 years. But it was then that Aslan came bounding into his mind, into his soul, so to speak, and it made everything work. And it was around Aslan that he was able to write the other 6 books. I say all that because his views of the Atonement in The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe are rather consistent intellectually with his views in Mere Christianity of the Atonement. He said he's not going to get into the different atonement theories, be it Christus Victor and what that entails, which we're not going to unpack fully tonight, be it the ransom to God theory, which would be the emperor beyond the sea, or the ransom to Satan theory, which would be Jadis the White Witch, or substitutionary atonement, penal substitutionary atonement. So those are like the four basic atonement theories. And what Lewis did in Mere Christianity is he said, I'm going to leave that to deeper theologians than myself. He was a lay theologian. But he said, what we do know is that the death of Christ made some form of atoning sacrifice for sins. Now, I would go out a bit on a limb here, maybe, and say that that's the cardinal issue at hand. I am a proponent. I believe in actually 3 of the 4 atonement theories. Personally, I believe in Christus Victor, that Christ defeated the forces of hell, which is there, right? When Aslan rises from the stone table and defeats the forces of evil. I believe in the ransom to God. I mean, he came and gave his life a ransom for many, a ransom to God. And I believe in penal substitution atonement, that he took the penalty of our sins as a substitute for his people, which Lewis would say in his lifetime, from what I've read, that he did not necessarily believe in.
Yeah.
I don't believe personally that it is cardinal or foundational to the faith to hold a particular one of those views. What I think it's important. I think it's very helpful. I think you're ultimately going to resort to one of those. I think the only one that is flawed is the ransom to Satan theory, like paying off Jadis, which you kind of see in the book too, right? It's like, that's my traitor. They belong to me. No, sin is an affront to God. It's not Satan who has held us captive, so to speak. Yeah. So anyway, all that to say, I think that Lewis was trying to push forward the idea that in the work of Christ, or Aslan in Narnia, something magical took place for his people. And I think that's all he was really trying to argue. So I don't think he was trying to get into the nitty gritty or specifics. And I think other people have kind of done that.
Not to do a side tangent on the various views of the atonement, but you said that you don't think that it's critical to, well, I guess what you're saying is there isn't one that if you don't believe that one, then you're not in, kind of thing.
Let me clarify. I'm glad you circle back. Critical is interesting because critical is important to me. It's not so cardinal. It means foundational. Like that this is a foundational aspect that if you deny, then you're damned. Yeah. I don't think that if you deny penal substitutionary atonement, you're damned. I think you're just wrong. I think you're in serious error, but I think you can still be a Christian and deny penal substitutionary atonement. What you can't be is a Christian and deny the atonement generally, which is what Lewis pushed forward. So I hope our listeners watchers understand what I'm saying is, I believe it is critically important that we have a proper view of what the atoning sacrifice of Christ did, that he did conquer the forces of evil in his death, that he did make atoning ransom sacrifice to God for the sins of his people, and that he was penalized under the weight of their sin, the severity of God's wrath for his people. I think all those hold up biblically, and I think they're all important. However, if somebody says, I don't believe the ransom to God theory, or I don't believe in penal substitutionary atonement, I would say they're in error, but if they're saying, I still trust Christ for my salvation as an atoning sacrifice, then I would not say they're outside of the covenant community.
I guess I would just say like a sacrifice to whom or to what or for what reason. I feel like that would be important, you think?
No, I think it is, but I think that ultimately everyone is going to choose one of those 4 theories if they're Orthodox Christian. The issue today is there's a lot of liberalism that has just set Christ up as an example or a benefactor of some sort, a morality standard. And that's outside of Orthodox Christianity. That would be damnable, heretical, whatever words you want to use. But there could be people who go, I really truly believe in the ransom to Satan theory, that the sacrifice was atoning in the sense of it did appease God without Jesus being like subject to the cosmic penalty of God's wrath. Yeah. And they might be confused. I would say they're wrong about that, but I don't think that they're on their way to hell for that. I just don't personally believe that. I think there's way too many people in history that we actually respect that took a variant view of the atonement while still holding to the atoning work of Christ was what was sufficient to save people. And they might not have drilled down into penal substitutionary atonement, a vicarious redemption, and yet I would say they were still believers, Lewis being one of them.
Yeah.
After taking 10 minutes to chop up the different atonement theories and views, which I do think is important so that somebody isn't like well, Lewis wasn't even a Christian, like he was.
Yeah.
He was an ardent believer in Christ and in the atonement and sacrifice of Christ. But I think the bigger, more pressing issue is what is so shocking to the world around us is not the specifics of how Christ redeemed his people, but that he redeemed his people, that he was the atoning sacrifice. And I think that that's really the beauty of the Aslan character. We talked last week about that Lewis said, these are not allegory. And, our listeners might know this if you studied it, but Tolkien hated the Chronicles of Narnia. He thought they were kind of cheap allegory. And it was one of the detrimental factors in their friendship ultimately that, they were like best of friends and then they became not friends anymore. And there was several factors involved in that, but this is one of them. But Lewis contended till his dying day that these were suppositional. And so what that meant is, suppose that there was another world. What might Messiah look like in that world? That's kind of more of the suppositional argument. And so it's not as concrete as allegorical, but it gives us these ideas and this imagery. And so I think the way he portrayed the Messiah in their world is almost perfect. I think the Aslan character, who, like I said, was not even thought of until 1947, was not in the original script, but then brings all the books together, was almost perfect. He is bold, he is beautiful, he is strong, he is fierce, he is terrifying, yet he is compassionate. And he's everything that in that world that Jesus is in this world, or that he should be seen as. And so I love that. And therefore, it's all the more moving when he does lay down his life on the stone table. But we can kind of back up a little bit from that, because I think there's a lot of other stuff to draw out of the story.
Yeah. Before we back up, though, I'm glad that you mentioned that you feel like it's a almost perfect parallel, because one of the notes I had written down is like, if you weren't already a Christian or didn't already believe these things, do you feel like the story of The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe would convince you of anything?
I don't think it would convince me. I find it to be more emotionally charged and existentially moving than intellectually apologetic. I don't think it offers the apologetic, other than the fact that, the apologetic that Lewis held to most ardently was the ontological argument, the belief that the reason anything exists, including a redemptive story that's kind of woven upon our conscience, rather than nothing exists, including the absence of a redemptive story that I would argue is woven upon our conscience. Like, we love redemption. We love to see the bad guy get what's coming to him. We love to see the broken restored. We love to see the hero win back his bride or his prize. We love that. We love the fallen being redeemed. And that's just woven into our DNA. And I think that is an apologetic from The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe. That's a subtle one, but I wouldn't say it's an intellectual endeavor necessarily into the apologetic realm that's convincing of this truth. I think it's more moving.
I would agree with you. One of the reasons I love these books and read them every year is precisely that. They are deeply moving, and I think they would be to any believer. I guess I'm kind of asking is like, do you think he was trying to convince anyone with these books? Is there any element of that in this series where he's trying to prove his point?
I think he's definitely trying to with children.
Yeah.
They're not exclusively children's books, but they were written for children. And I think with children, he's helping them. He understands that children, but also the adults, one day will be old enough to read fairy tales again, we talked about last week, that we understand truth most clearly, most vividly through story form. And so I think he's trying to help children, chiefly even though Lewis was not a big fan of children, he did not empathize with children. He didn't really like them, he said. But he liked them in a more ambiguous sort of way. And he did have these three, or some biographers argue there was 4 children that came and lived with him. But he did have at least 3 children, 3 girls of the same family who came and lived with him in the countryside during the bombings in London. And that's what inspired the Pevensey children who went and lived on their, on this grand estate. But I think he was definitely trying to help convince children of the legitimacy of this so they could understand it, and then maybe even those who have more of a story form mind. Yeah.
So pick up from the end of The Magician's Nephew. Part of the point of this series was to dive more deeply into these books than we're doing each week on Sundays. So maybe pick up from the end of that one and kind of set the scene of what happens. And I mean, this is obviously the most famous one, the one that most people are going to be familiar with. But there's still so many great little, just like in The Magician's Nephew, so many great little scenes, turns of phrase, things he just captures so well.
So what a lot of people don't realize is that the professor in Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe, Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe was written first, right? It took a decade to write it. Diggory, is it Kirk? I think anyway, Professor Kirk. But Diggory is the boy from The Magician's Nephew a half a century earlier. As you come onto the scene here in Narnia, it's about 1,300 years has gone by from The Magician's Nephew, and Jadis has been ruling. At some point in time, the humans were displaced, the human being the cabbie and his wife, who were the first king and queen of Narnia. They've been displaced, and Jadis took over. We do not get any backstory of like really how that happened in any of the books. But it's under this curse where it's always winter now, and for someone who is living in Cambridge and Oxford, the winters there are very cold and very dreary and very wet, and the sun goes down early. I mean, that's a very northern position. And so, Lewis is capturing that depression and that hopelessness that would be pervasive during winter time. But Diggory is now, an older professor. It says the end of The Magician's Nephew, which once again, I'll just reiterate, was written after Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe, so Lewis had this in mind, but that he took in The Magician's Nephew, Aslan, when Diggory as a child refuses temptation at the hand of Jadis, Aslan then gives him an apple that he takes back to our world, and it miraculously cures his mother. The core of that apple is then buried in his backyard, and a tree grows from it. And it renders these beautiful apples that, while they're not medicinal, they're better tasting, and they put people in a better mood. And then a terrible storm blows the tree down. Diggory cannot fathom distrapping it, so he builds it into a wardrobe, but he himself does not realize it's magical. It says that at the end of The Magician's Nephew. He doesn't realize it's magical. Yeah. He doesn't realize it's a portal. Throughout the series, you get all these portals. I think the portals, whether it's the rings in The Magician's Nephew, whether it's the picture frame, the Voyage of the Dawn Treader, whether it's obviously the wardrobe and the Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe, these portals are meant to be a play. I believe they're meant to be to encourage us toward the portal of imagination, toward the portal of seeing more vividly in color through the form of story. And so while they are actual portals in from our world to the other world, and you actually find this with the Telmarines in Prince Caspian, which we'll get to next week, or 2 weeks from now.
Yeah.
But they enter a portal through a cave as pirates in our world in the 1940s and make their way into Narnia to become elite and corrupt ruling class. But I think that Lewis was trying to, through the wardrobe, say, hey, that's why that phrase has become popular, through the wardrobe, because it's basically saying enter into a different dimension, enter into a different world, and see things kind of from a new and fresh perspective. So the wardrobe is a passage for the Pavenzi children, but it's also a passage for our minds to move from purely didactic to imagery and beauty. And so that's what I think that's an important note to take away. Also, I would point out with Professor, he is very, I would say, very early on in the book, he surprises you. He tells the children, like, how is Lucy possibly lying? And I pointed this out in my sermon, but for those who don't listen to the sermon, he kind of presents in the defense of Lucy the trilemma that is presented in the defense of Jesus in Mere Christianity, that he is either Lord, lunatic, or liar, and that Lucy is either telling the truth, telling a lie of that's preposterous and almost sadistic, or that she is a crazy person. And he's like, she's not crazy. And it's like the children bring this outlandish story about a wardrobe and a fawn and a snow-blanketed land that's cursed. And he's like, how do you know she's not telling the truth? And I love that about, obviously he's been in Narnia. He has not been in Narnia for 50 or 60 years at this point, but he's been in Narnia. He knows that it's true, but he still just encourages them to think beyond what they can see. And I think Lewis is encouraging the reader in a day, I talked about this last week with the lampstand, in a day where it was only, I will only accept something as true if I can understand it, if I can see it, if I can touch it, if I can put my hands on it, very age of enlightenment thinking, that there's an existential reality that goes a lot deeper than that within us. And just like the lamppost is more so a guide to draw people into it rather than to direct them as to where to go. Yeah. That's what Lewis is kind of pointing at through The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe at times with, Professor Diggory is, what if there is truth beyond our limited kind of arrogant dimension of rationality? How many things in life do we say were impossible or they couldn't be true until we came to realize that they are true? And they're very much possible. They're factual. And so I think Lewis is presenting that, and it's kind of his own, Diggory was his biographical sketch. I think it's his own admission through Diggory now in Lion, the Witch, and Wardrobe that there were things that I didn't accept because I couldn't wrap my mind around because I thought I was too smart. But what if it is true? What if all of this is true? Yeah. So I thought that's something interesting to be pointed out, and hopefully we learn from that we never reach a point where we just think we have absolutely everything figured out.
Yeah, I like that you pointed that out because I do think the siblings, the four characters kind of, or at least seem to clearly represent certain things. It doesn't seem subtle anyway. Peter kind of represents courage and leadership, the true believer. Susan is doubt, skepticism, practicality. Edmund, sin, redemption. Yeah. But then Lucy, who kind of the whole story hinges on, I think she kind of represents what you're talking about, that faith and perception. Yeah. And it's interesting that Lucy is always right. She's always right in this book. Yeah. She's always right, but she's almost never believed. And I said last time, do you think this is intentional? Something about Magician's Nephew, and you said, everything obviously is very intentional because Lewis is that kind of guy. Yeah. But what I'm saying is, from the skeptical point of view, do you think he's making a theological claim there in like faith as perception, not argument?
I think he's making the argument that, and this is why I love him, he was extremely rational. He was quite the intellect, a scholar for sure. But yet he's also saying that there's a dimension, an existential dimension that Lucy experiences throughout the book. That happens in Prince Caspian too. Remember, she encounters Aslan. No one believes her again. Yeah. And then she hears him on the Dawn Treader. Courage, dear heart. And we'll get to all that in the coming weeks. But there's a dimension to her that the others, a depth to her that the others don't seem to have. She's not, you would say, incompetent intellectually. Like, there's nothing about her that's dumb or trite or stupid or, flimsy. Yeah. But there's a depth to her existentially, I would say, that I think Lewis is either, from reading him, I almost feel like he craved that himself. He craved a deeper experiential reality and dimension that he sees now posited in Lucy. Yeah.
Because she does kind of represent faith in that sense. Yeah. She just believes. And why wouldn't she believe? There isn't really any of the doubt and skepticism that we see in some of the other characters. And I think you're right that, he probably wanted that for himself. I've wanted that for myself.
Yeah. So, obviously Lucy and, he, once again, there's so much here, but, Lewis might be pressing forward the idea that faith itself is a portal. That faith itself unlocks a new dimension of understanding. And Lucy is clearly the one with the deepest, most robust faith. And so she's able to get through the wardrobe first. And then when she comes back and they doubt her, it seems like faith is what opens the wardrobe to Narnia to a degree. Yeah. Childlike faith is what he's saying, because when they doubt her, it creates doubt within herself. And so then when they go back to the wardrobe, they knock on the back of the wood and oh, you're ridiculous, Lou. I can't believe you would do, whatever. Yeah. And so Lucy enters in first, meets Mr. Tumless, the fawn, by Lantern Waste, where the lamppost is that was thrown at Aslan's head in The Magician's Nephew, but now is a beacon of hope. It's redemptive in and of itself. And she hears about the curse of the White Witch. She returns. Mr. Tumless is going to turn her in. He puts her asleep with some treats, and then She wakes up and he's crying and she confesses it and takes her back to the lantern waste, back into the wardrobe. She tells her brother and sister, no time has passed. She's like, I've been gone all day and no time has passed, which once again is Lewis's way of saying we can enter into another dimension through literature, through fiction, through fairy tale, through imagination without wasting any time in this world. Like no time has to go by. I mean, like obviously the time goes by when you're reading a book, but you can actually travel to, I mean, what's that quote that says, 1,000 adventures, 10,000 lands, without ever leaving your couch. Like, that's the idea that Lewis is always trying to communicate is go have adventures through the eye of imagination. And so she's ridiculed by her brother and sister. That's when they end up going to, after Edmund then goes into the cursed land, he meets the White Witch. She goes back to Mr. Tomless. They come back into the real world, and Edmund's just like, so insufferable throughout the book. He's like, he makes fun of her. He won't admit the truth. And then, and I'm kind of skimming through this. Just most people have seen the movie, I would imagine, or at least familiar. I mean, this is the, according to most lists, the 7th or 9th most published book of all time. I mean, so this is a wildly famous book. I mean, like just a very, very famous book. It's been published in hundreds of languages around the world. And so ultimately, the 4 Pevensie children all enter into the land of Narnia. There's a prophecy, an ancient prophecy, that when the seats at Cair Paravel are filled by 2 sons of Adam and 2 daughters of Eve, then justice will be restored and wrong will be right. And that Aslan is coming. The beavers, they encounter this beaver family, Mr. and Mrs. Beaver, and they tell them, hey, Aslan's on the move. Who's Aslan? And so there's some of the most quotable moments in the book there when they go, he's a lion. I think it's Susan who's like, is he safe? Is he quite safe? And they're like, no, he's not safe, but he's good and he's the king. And when he comes, and then there's that limerick that I recite in my sermon, but I mean, it could be repeated again, like that wrong will be right. When Aslan comes in sight, sound of his roar, sorrows no more. When he bares his teeth, winter will meet its death. And when he shakes his mane, there will be spring again. It's this idea of like colossal redemption. It's the idea of spring coming into the winter. It's the idea of the snow melting. It's the idea of evil being vanquished. And so 3 of the children want to meet Aslan, but one of them, Edmund, leaves after hearing about Aslan and goes back to the White Witch to get more Turkish delight and to basically defeat his brother. He hates his brother. There's a deep hatred for his older brother, Peter. And so now the White Witch is on the move. Jadis is her name. Well, we encountered her obviously in The Magician's Nephew. Jadis is Persian for witch, just like Aslan is Turkish for lion. That's where those names come from. And what's interesting is Cair Paravel actually is from the Old English, which obviously Lewis and Tolkien were linguists, but it's from the Old English, and it literally means Cair means court and Paravel means lower. And so even in Cair Paravel, with the high king and high queen sit, it's understood that they are still under another greater authority. So Cair Paravel communicates that they're under the reign of the emperor beyond the sea and the authority of Aslan. And so you have all this imagery that's woven throughout the language of the book, that's written through the characters and through the stories and through the setting. Eventually, Edmund is rescued after he realizes how deplorable the White Witch is. And one of the moments I think is really cool is when he's rescued, and Aslan says to his brothers and sisters, this is another unique moment, but he says to his brothers and sisters when they're reunited with Edmund and he's wronged them, he's betrayed them on the deepest level. Aslan says, here's your brother. There's no need to talk about what's past. Like, it's just like a really cool moment where it's like, like he understood, he's confessed it. Like, there's no need to keep conjuring this. And we could all learn a lesson from that, right? Yeah. But also I love it that there's a part in the book right after that where Jadis appears and goes, Aslan, you have a traitor among you. He belongs to me. So she's throwing all these indictments at him. And then Lewis writes that Edmund hardly even heard them because his eyes were so fixed on Aslan. Like, that's just like really cool too. Like the idea of all these, bring on the accusations, kind of like that Luther quote, bring on the accusations. Like, there's one who stood in my place. Like, he's made atonement for my sins. So that's like, those moments are like really cool. Ultimately though, there is a deep magic from the dawn of time that says that upon this, a traitor like this, somebody that is this treasonous, is the property of and the ownership of the White Witch, the property of evil. And you would believe that that's part of what's written on the stone table is this deep magic.
And he's portraying here that humanity is essentially owned by, enslaved by evil. Edmund is a human representative in his position.
Correct. I think he would only be wrong in the sense that we are enslaved. Scripture talks about that too, sin, Galatians 4:3 and in Romans chapter 3, verse 10, 11, so forth. But it's our master in that it dictates our movements, but it's not our master in that it owns us.
Yeah.
You know, or that it needs to be paid off. The debt that needs to be paid off is owed to God. So like that's,
yeah.
But there's nuance there that he doesn't really explore or get into.
Yeah.
But upon the stone table, it's an altar of sacrifice. It's a representation of the law, right? Of the tablets of stone of the law. It's also, you know, Lewis wasn't far from Stonehenge, about 50 miles, I think, where he taught academically from Stonehenge, which is the most famous stone structure in the world. There's about 200 of those across the Irish countryside alone where Lewis grew up. But those were seen as places of deep healing. People with infirmities would go there for healing.
Yeah.
What Lewis communicates is on this altar, the law is accomplished, the law is fulfilled. And when the sacrifice is made, healing flows, but not from the stones themselves, but from the one who laid upon the stones. Like that's
right.
The whole imagery. So he's communicating a deeper reality to mystics, you know, that, hey, look, you are looking for healing, but you're looking for it in the wrong place or objective. Like it's found, you know, in true Messiah and true Aslan. And so Aslan dies there up on the stone table. He is, you know, you have your Gethsemane moment where he is in turmoil of spirit. You have your mockery. He's spit upon, it says. They howl and they blaspheme him and they cut his mane and they shear him and they bind him up and then they slay him with a dagger up on the stone table. All very vivid imagery. And then, you know, one of the best moments of the book, which I did read in my sermon, but is when in the morning, Susan and Lucy, they find him dead. The little mice are eating away the ropes that bind him. And then they walk a little ways away and look out toward the ocean. They hear a loud snap. They look back, Aslan's not there, stone table's cracked, and he's risen. He's come back to life and his mane is regrown. He's in all his glory and all his majesty. And then he helps them, or they help him, however you want to see it, defeat. It would be impossible without him. Defeat the White Witch, but not only defeat her, but he then breathes life back in. It's a regenerating effect of his resurrection. He breathes life into all those that she has turned to stone. Another little known fact, by the way, is that Jadis, the White Witch, is taken from The Snow Queen by Hans Christian Andersen. So just like she who turned people to ice, Jadis turns people to stone, and they have very similarities in how they look and how they act. And so Lewis borrowed from a lot of different literary sources, especially in the world of fantasy. And I think he didn't do this because he was lazy. I think he did this because it would give better mental imagery to people back in the day when they did not have television and iPads and internet and things of that nature. So they would be able to really visualize what Jadis, the White Witch, looked like through the eyes of Hans Christian Andersen, so to speak. So, and ultimately they rise to royalty. The four children do through the power and strength of Aslan, who appoints them. He's the one who ushers in the coronation, and they all earn kind of a moniker in the book and in the movie. It's an incredible story to see, and so that kind of gives you a story form, picturesque idea of what happened.
One of the things I wanted to talk about was the table and the cracking of the table. I really like the imagery there, and the stone table cracks. I mean, you can draw parallels to the veil being torn, like if you want to make it that literal, but I think it's worth some discussion that, and again, I don't know if Lewis is being intentional, probably so, but the law doesn't disappear, it breaks. And do you think he is trying to say something specific about the relationship of the law to the gospel?
I think so. I think the fact that, just the stone table is mentioned in various other books. You know, you get to Prince Caspian and it's talked about again there. That's where the children might come back to. They end up coming back to Tir Paravel, but they could come back to the hill that now enshrines the stone table. But I think the stone table exists for the same reason the law does. And it's always to ultimately remind us of what was required, which was a lawful perfection. And also as the cracked table, it just reminds us of what was accomplished, you know, like, so when they look at it, it doesn't disappear. Like you said, it's still there. Like, and every time they look at it, it reminds of treason and treachery and redemption and rescue and the depth of divine love. And so I think that's why Lewis kept going back to it. I think it's a great representation of, like, what was done for us.
Yeah.
And I think it's a freeing issue as well, because never in any of the books, they run back to the stone table and start reading it to see what is required of them for Aslan to love them. That's just not there. It's we're free of that law of requirement. Now the law of love is what pervades. Like we're unleashed, so to speak, to love him and to follow him and to adore him. And that's, I think Lewis was right on that, even though I'm sure he still struggled with lawful legality and like we all do at times when it comes to like meriting our salvation, even though we would theoretically say it's not possible, So I think he captured that pretty well.
I also think one of the reasons I love these books is how well he captures these truths in ways, as we've already discussed, are very emotionally meaningful. But it's interesting that I think most Christians would look at The Lion, the Witch, and Wardrobe and be like, yes and amen. Aslan, he isn't safe, but he's good. Everyone would agree. I think that is C.S. Lewis' correction of what he saw as sort of comfortable religion, that sure. A fully domesticated God is a God you've stopped taking seriously. And so just to put it to you, do you think that the church actually believes this? And what does a, quote, not safe God look like in practice in our day versus just as a bumper sticker something people say?
Well, I love that he keeps saying throughout all the books, he's not a tame lion, he's a wild lion. He keeps saying that. And to me, that just means he can do whatever he wants. Like, that's really what it means. And I think that the Jesus most people are associated with really can't do whatever he wants.
Right.
Or if we're just honest, there's limitations to him that we've drawn, that religion has drawn. And so by Lewis saying that, it's just a reminder to him, to Lewis, who was such an atheist and then had to come to this gripping realization of, like, maybe I'm the one who's wrong. maybe this wild lion is actually a beast that can do whatever he wants. And I think it was just his way of promoting again to the world around him, to the scholastic community, to children, and to, he probably had no idea that 80, 90 years later, people would still be reading these books. But it's a way of communicating that, hey, he's not tameable. He's not domesticated. He's wild. He's unpredictable even. And he can do what he wants. And like, that's a really good thing that he can, because he is at liberty now to make sacrifice on the stone table. He's at liberty to like raise the dead, to conquer the White Witch, and he has the power to do it. So I do think that's why I said from the outside, I think just the way that he portrayed Aslan is so riveting and genuine to like the narrative account of who Jesus was and is.
Well, and you did answer that, I guess. In what ways, maybe like some really practical, like day-to-day ways, do you think that a not safe Jesus, this wild, untamed Savior, if we really believed that, how it would upend the lives we live day to day in, America in 2026?
Like, I don't believe that we actually believe that he will love us unconditionally. I've referenced on the podcast and said in my sermons many times the Steve Brown quote that the only people who get better are the people who realize that if they never get better, God will love them anyway. Like we really have a hard time believing that, and we want to say he can't do that. Like, but what if he can and does, and that's just one example. But what happens is when you start to believe that, you can live your life in a certain level of comfort, and life is hard. Like, life is like really, really difficult for most people, especially the older you get. You start losing your sanity. At times you definitely, you lose loved ones, you lose relationships. There's infighting, there's always drama. The church is, a hospital, but hospitals have a lot of sick people. And so sick people spread illness, and there's all kinds of stuff that happens. And to believe that you're like truly, truly irrevocably loved by God, the depth of God's love for you is unwavering and forgiven of all sin, past, present, future. Like, that's, it's things like that I think we would say, we'd espouse those things theoretically, but when it starts to actually like land upon us, like, it brings a whole new sense of hope and comfort. And it's things of that nature, the things that matter most, not, we've talked about it before, but not a healthy, temporal prosperity, whatever, not that kind of stuff. But it's what matters most in life: freedom, peace, like hope, joy, like even in the face of sorrow. And so I think all those things are definitely helpful.
Yeah. Yeah, I totally agree with you. I think that he captured in the character of Aslan across these 7 books something I don't know if anyone else has ever accomplished in the written word. Like, he really did capture the essence of Jesus' character.
I agree. Yeah.
All right, next week, Horse and His Boys, that's next? I think that's next.
Yeah, Horse and His Boys next. Yep.
All right. And I will just spoiler that one. That either is my favorite or it's tied with The Last Battle. I think
funny.
The Horse and His Boy might edge it out slightly for me. That's always...
Those are definitely my top 3, but Iron Chair's right up there with them.
Yeah.
So
I mean, I love them all. I just, Horse and His Boys always, there's moments in there that, again, like you said, are so moving.
Yeah, they're very gripping. Yeah.
Anyway, all right, we'll do that one next.
All right, sounds good.